Alrighty. Greetings, friends. We are live here on Rockfin and YouTube, simulcasting. Just got to get everything ready to go, and we are off. All right. Well, thank you for joining me on this lovely autumn afternoon, or I guess pre-autumn. It's been an interesting couple of days. If you've been following my travails, you may know that I've been paying extra attention to what's going on currently at colleges and universities in terms of the continuing lockdown-esque measures being imposed. And why is this important? Well, for a variety of reasons. And I just see somebody in the comments who has requested that I give him credit for using his using a screenshot from the video that he took of me a few days ago. So yes, Flammery Man, I hereby give you credit for the thumbnail, and I've given you credit in the Substack article that I published last night. Sorry for that interruption. But anyway, so what essentially happened was, and you would have known this if you followed my tweets or my other streams from last week, what's essentially happening now by my lights is that colleges and universities in many parts of the country, but particularly acutely, it seems, in the Northeast, are adopting what can only be described as a permanent model, crisis model of COVID suppression. And anytime a permanent crisis model or a permanent crisis mentality or a permanent crisis system of thought becomes implanted, it's a real problem for anybody who even minimally values civil liberties. And it's a real problem for anybody who even minimally values freedom of expression. And I'm not just doing one of these cliched, oh, free speech is the best rants, although I am relatively close to you with what you would call a free speech absolutist. I'm talking about something more subtle. I'm talking about the subconscious constraints that you absorb, or one may absorb, in the midst of a permanent crisis style atmosphere. Because if you're constantly being told by authority figures, if you're constantly being lectured and harangued by college administrators, by politicians, by public health experts, by all manner of other characters who wield power over society, then over time you're going to get habituated into this frame of mind where you accept and tolerate and submit to intrusions into your private affairs, intrusions into what you can or cannot say, because if you transgress orthodoxies that are tied to this permanent crisis mentality, then you could face various social, reputational, professional, or financial repercussions. And so it's important, I think, especially at this phase, especially when there is no longer any conceivable rational basis to continue perpetuating a permanent crisis model of COVID mitigation, it's just vital now to try to the best of one's ability to nip this in the bud. And I don't think I can do it alone, clearly, but my experience over these past few days has at least suggested that if people are willing to take some risk, willing to put themselves out there to some degree, then surprisingly, you can actually have an impact. So what happened? Well, last week I began to cover the situation at this college in Connecticut, Connecticut College in New London. And full disclaimer, I would not otherwise have much of an interest in the peculiarities of administrative policy at this somewhat obscure, liberal arts college in southeastern Connecticut. It just wouldn't be on my radar. It came onto my radar when I saw that Connecticut College administrators had imposed what may well at the time have been, and probably very likely was, the most extreme lockdown protocol anywhere in the US. Students were being confined to their rooms. They were being barred from socializing. They could not have visits with friends. They required special permission slips to even attempt to leave campus. Administrators had taken it upon themselves to intervene extremely forcefully and aggressively in the student population at Connecticut College. So I thought that could have some pretty significant wider societal ramifications, and thus my interest was compelled. So I began to look into it, and then slowly but surely, actually not slowly, fairly rapidly, I began to get inundated with messages from Connecticut College students who were apprising me of the situation. And it was frankly worse than I would have thought, because number one, the entire population, the entire student body, and as well as the staff and faculty at Connecticut College, they had already been required to subject themselves to mandatory vaccination. And I don't say that in a nefarious way. I think, there's a debate to be had over whether vaccine mandates are defensible or not. But that's not even really the issue. The issue is here that the vaccine had already been universally taken at this campus, right? But nonetheless, once you have a week or two of in-person social activity at this college, the administrators decide to reverse course and institute a shutdown. And they instituted a shutdown. Why exactly? Well, because the administrators, again, reneging on the assurance that they had given to students that the vaccine would enable a return to normalcy, the administrators had chosen to effectuate this completely superfluous and redundant and unnecessary and invasive surveillance testing regime. And you see these kinds of regimes being instated more and more around the country at different institutions, particularly educational institutions and influential ones at that, but also in corporate workplaces, in governmental bodies, and so on. And what that really is, ultimately, is the erection of a permanent surveillance apparatus. And why do people accept the erection of permanent surveillance apparatuses? Well, because they view it as benign, largely. They view it as a measure to safeguard their own security or safety or sense of well-being. They view it benevolently, right? And that's why it gets this assent. That's why after 9/11, largely the populace assented to, with some exceptions, but largely the populace assented to the erection of an unprecedentedly mammoth surveillance, mass surveillance apparatus in the interest of supposedly safeguarding them from terrorism. And what ended up happening with that mammoth security state apparatus that was put into effect after 9/11? Well, it was rampant and rife with abuses. Mass data collection of phone records and internet records through the NSA, entrapping people for supposedly engaging in terrorism plots that had been orchestrated more or less by the FBI, and on and on and on. So that initial countenance of the creation of the surveillance state apparatus was extremely misguided and was fueled by emotion and kind of reactive knee-jerk reasoning. And so if you see something similar, now I'm not making a direct comparison or analogy between 9/11 and COVID. I'm simply calling attention to certain similarities in the mentality which underlies this attitude of submission and acceptance. And so for now to see a new surveillance apparatus being erected around us, I think if you're cognizant of the lessons of 9/11, if you commemorated the anniversary last weekend with a statement of belief in the need to recognize the excesses of the post 9/11 period, then your mind should really be concentrated right now as we're in the early phases of the erection of a new wide-scale surveillance regime. And the test cases for this regime, or the kind of incubators of this regime, are more and more seemingly at college campuses. So that's why I'm paying attention now, and that's why I paid attention to the Connecticut College case, because of these wider societal ramifications. But on top of that, there was also a more kind of parochial reason why I was paying such intensive attention to this situation at Connecticut College, which was undergoing this really capricious and arbitrary and overly intrusive Australia-style lockdown. It was because I kept getting messages from students who were telling me uniformly that they felt incapable or unable to register their grievances with the administration, to express their criticisms of the lockdown policy that they were being subject to, because if they were to do so, they would find themselves facing social repercussions, disciplinary repercussions. I've heard from a number of people in athletic programs at Connecticut College who cannot speak out publicly because they could have issues with whatever team they're on or whatever sport they play. And also because there's this really pervasive snitch culture at Connecticut College that had been encouraged by the administrators and eagerly taken on by a vocal and aggressive faction of students. And that segment of students was really dominating the discussion or debate, to the extent there was any, of the COVID protocols there. And again, just to clarify, why is it that they actually went into lockdown? Well, because the surveillance testing regimen that the administrators decided to impose, even though the entire student body more or less was vaccinated, it had, as would be inevitable, turned up a slew of positive test results. And when I say a slew, it's really even not that many. There were 50 approximately positive test results on the day that the administrators decided to decree this lockdown scenario. And what happens more and more on these college campuses when administrators are putting out their kind of obnoxious communiques is that they'll blame the students. They'll blame the students for socializing. They'll blame the students for gathering. They'll blame the students for not being hyper scrupulous and maintaining perfect mask wearing protocols. They'll scapegoat the student body for the poor and irrational decisions that the administrators themselves are responsible for. It's a way to shift blame and deflect responsibility from themselves, because it's a choice to impose these unnecessary and superfluous surveillance testing regimes. What I was told was that almost universally, the students who did test positive, because they had been, subjected to forcible testing against their will in some cases, they were either totally asymptomatic or had very, very mild symptoms from COVID, as you would expect from a population of individuals that are vaccinated and are also young, 18 to 22 approximately. But nonetheless, because of this paranoid and overzealous mentality that administrators are so invested in after the past year and a half, they have to react with maximal frenzy at the mere onset of any kind of uptick in cases, whether or not those cases actually signify significant disease, which they largely do not, almost uniformly do not at college campuses. And notwithstanding that, everybody who has wanted to get a vaccine, which does minimize susceptibility to serious illness, everybody who's wanted a vaccine has been able to get one for 8 months. So we are long past the time of any kind of immediately pressing crisis situation vis-a-vis COVID. And yet these administrators need to buy in to the crisis style interpretation of what COVID portends, because they have a lot on the line reputationally. They have a lot on the line financially. I mean, many of these colleges have dedicated just a mind-boggling amount of money to kind of constructing these surveillance regimes. They exist within a cultural milieu where being seen to accept COVID cases is like grounds for damnation and condemnation. And so you have this kind of confluence of factors that assures irrational reactions to something as relatively uneventful as a couple students, a few dozen, testing positive because of the testing regime that they are being subjected to. And so you had students at Connecticut College that were sent off into isolation housing. They had just gotten back to campus. So I heard from people who were saying that they had actually were struggling with serious mental health issues as a result of this isolation. Sports had been canceled, socializing canceled, just a weird, kind of quasi-dystopian situation at this college, which, again, notwithstanding its relative obscurity, was important to by my lights because of the example it would set, right? So they had been in lockdown for a number of days. I had gotten so many messages from students who urged me, after I had done 2 articles on the situation, which you can go read at Substack, were urging and encouraging me to come to the campus and speak, deliver some remarks on the situation, try to prompt some debate which otherwise been stifled in this atmosphere, again, given the rampant snitching culture and the risk that students with a contrary view face for daring to say anything that's contrary to the dominant line. And so I resolved to go do that. Now, so on Sunday night, I came to the New London, Connecticut area and said that I would go to the campus at 4 p.m. the following day and deliver some remarks. Simple, right? Not something that's unprecedented at a college campus to deliver some remarks at the request and urging of students. You wouldn't think. Yet, on the afternoon that I was due to arrive, I got messages and it was getting fed intel from students. And then if any of you are watching, thank you for this. I was getting fed intel that the college had actually intensified its lockdown solely to prevent my entry. So they were blocking off and blockading the gates. They were, monitoring IDs and for people who were trying to enter. They had gone to like their little mini version of DEFCON mode to impede my ability to enter the campus and speak at the request of at least a significant portion of students. Now, I never thought prior to my arrival that I would be greeted with universal adulation. In fact, I expected the opposite, because one of the primary reasons I was even going in the first place was because there was this vocal and aggressive contingent of students who were very pro-administration, pro-lockdown, immersed in this whole mentality of, maximal safetyism, which is at this point utterly fallacious. I think a year ago, right, pre-vaccines, some of these lockdown measures still would have been quite excessive, quite condemnable even for the collateral damage that they cause. But you could at least understand the logic of them because we were in this, um, this very tenuous predicament, according to many, where we wanted to stop the spread of a new disease. But now we're just way past the point where any orchestration of policy around this framework of a crisis is just totally unacceptable. That is, anyway, if you're interested in civil liberties, which I am, in a whole variety of venues, which you would know if you have followed any of my work. So I knew that there would be this segment of students who did not want me to come, did not want me to speak, and so forth. But I accepted that because prompting debate is a good thing in its own right, especially if debate has been suppressed in a particular atmosphere. And that notwithstanding, I wouldn't have gone if I hadn't gotten message after message after message from students, some of whom were actually in isolation housing at the time and could not come see me in person. If I hadn't gotten message after message from these students beckoning me to come. So I did. I ended up making it onto the campus through a pedestrian pathway that I guess the DEF CON security force had forgotten to shutter. And I began to deliver my remarks, and within minutes, I was intercepted by the administration security lackeys who informed me that it was impermissible for me to continue speaking, even though it was at the request of Connecticut College students. So wasn't about to make any kind of confrontation, didn't want to make a show of things, and I complied with the order to vacate the campus. But thankfully, at the direction and guiding of students, I was able to go to a little kind of nook of campus on an exterior sidewalk, which is sort of humorous, where I could stand on the sidewalk because it was, city property, not college property, and students could still stand around and listen and engage with me, which I wanted to do. And so I spoke for around 2 hours, and opinions were mixed. There were some, if you've seen any clips, you'll know that there were some students who were highly antagonistic. 2 students attempted to pelt me with eggs. The first one seemed to have been pelted by a moving vehicle, and so that egg missed by a long shot. But another student ambled on up to me at point blank range, fired the egg, and still missed. So my advice to that student was really do a little bit more practicing next time you want to go fire an egg at somebody, because to miss at point blank range is kind of embarrassing. But that notwithstanding, I actually appreciated and enjoyed the mixture of opinion. There were some who were supportive of me, but as expected, they could not be nearly as vocal because they were going to get drowned out and blamed and reprimanded by the segment of students who were vocally pro-lockdown and vocally pro-administration. And yet I took all the questions and comments that the oppositional students wanted to make, and I was happy to do so. Again, spoke for around 2 hours. In my Substack article that I published last night, I posted a link to, and I didn't record any of it myself, but like every other person who was there seemed to be streaming or taking video. So I posted a portion of the event that was recorded by one person taking video. I think that version is about 1 hour and 10 minutes, and I was there for, I think, roughly 2 hours. So it's not the entire event, but it's a significant portion of it. So you can go take a look at that if you'd like. Linked to in my Substack article. So that's mtracy.substack.com, and it's also linked to in the description box here. So the back and forth I think is invigorating. I think it's good to have a passionate exchange of ideas about a highly consequential issue that has wider societal ramifications. As I stressed over and over again, it wasn't solely about Connecticut College itself, although there was a particular problem with Connecticut College being subject to this climate of dissenting opinion being prescribed. So if I could puncture that bubble, then I also viewed that to be of utility, and seemingly I did. After the event was over, I chatted with some of the students, including some who were voicing criticisms of me, and we seemed to get along, perfectly well. There were some bizarre moments where a young woman came up and was essentially accusing me of drawing, and I think you can see this in the video that I linked to in the Substack, but she was accusing me of drawing inferences about her sexual orientation based on her appearance. Now, that seemed to me like an irrelevancy. Why would it even enter my mind to ponder what this person's sexual orientation is? Why would I care, frankly? But that's what she had to say. There was another young woman who accused me of only coming because I needed to feel more secure in my masculinity, which I can also assure you was not my conscious intention at all. I don't really go around boasting about my masculine prowess. But there were a lot of, I think, constructive exchanges, even despite the egg throwing and despite some of the heckling, which I actually do welcome, because at the end, ultimately, I went there because there was a segment of students who could not speak on their own behalf. That was made clear to me in the many, many, many messages that I received. So if I could speak on their behalf, then I view that as an accomplishment unto itself. So afterwards, I left the campus. A lot of the students who I had been in touch with thanked me for improving their situation, for getting a debate started, for piercing through this kind of lockdown of debate being stifled, and so I felt that to be an accomplishment, because every single time, and let me underscore this, every single time in anything that I do journalistically, I'm always going to prioritize the wishes and opinions and needs of ordinary people who don't have platforms, who don't have the ability to express themselves sufficiently. I'm always going to prioritize those people over the media hordes, many of whom hate me, and I dislike them in turn. But I'm never going to cater to them. I'm never going to modulate what I do to be more mollifying to them. I don't care what they think. Actually, their contempt fuels me. Their kind of herd-minded, snark-infested, just whole facade that they put on social media is something that I hold myself out in opposition to and wish to destroy, frankly. So that they don't like me or had a negative reaction, I think bolstered my belief in the rightness of what I chose to do, because any validation I was going to derive was going to come from the students who urged me to come, not from YouTube commentators who shall go unnamed, and not from Twitter kind of charlatans. So that's my attitude on that. I noticed a lot of people, were scoffing at my physical appearance. Well, you know what? I'm not a supermodel. I'll grant that. I don't go around holding myself out as some kind of pinnacle of human beauty. If anybody wants to become my beauty consultant, email me or DM me and we can negotiate your fee. But 99 times out of 100, what I prioritize is going to be the principles at stake and the needs and desires of the real people at issue. So if, but at the same time, I can step back and be amused that when I was expelled from the main area of campus and had to trudge over to this exterior sidewalk area, my shirt apparently did become partially untucked, and a lot of people were very fixated on that. So you can be assured that going forward, I will pay special attention to my the whereabouts of my shirt location. Um, so, but I'm going to determine whether this was a worthwhile endeavor, not based on snippets of social media, snark. I'm going to base it on whether it actually accomplished something of use. And the following day after my appearance at Connecticut College, within just a couple of just within hours, less than 24 hours, the benevolent dean, Victor Arcellus, the benevolent dean, he issued one of his many email pronouncements, which, by the way, have to be some of the most obnoxiously written email pronouncements I've ever seen, and I read a lot of obnoxious emails. He announced that the college was reversing course. They were lifting the lockdown. Wow. Now, I'm too humble to ever claim direct credit for that, of course, but I think anybody is free to draw whatever inferences they like. The good dean claimed that he came to the decision to lift the lockdown after conferring with none other than Anthony Fauci. Wow. Um, so apparently Anthony Fauci was responsible for the lifting of the lockdown, not me, according to the dean's official comments. Now, I don't know if I buy that exactly, but whatever the reason the lockdown was lifted, it's good that it's lifted, because measures like this, extreme interventions into the private lives of adults on a fallacious premise of maximalist safety, that needs to be countered now more than ever, because we cannot tolerate the perpetuation of a permanent crisis mentality taking over all manner of institutions. Otherwise, civil liberties are going to get eroded, just like they were after 9/11, although from a different angle, perhaps. Otherwise, freedom of thought will be stifled. Otherwise, we are going to be just subjects to this endless surveillance regime forevermore. And that's not something that I welcome, and I would hope many others of you do not either. And this should not even be a partisan issue. I know that's kind of a cliche as well, but I was very willing earlier on, and much to the consternation of some of my more libertarian and right-wing followers, I was willing actually to make some temporary allowances for policies to ostensibly mitigate COVID that I couldn't necessarily justify on epidemiological grounds. I'm not an epidemiologist. I'm not an expert in infectious disease. So yes, as a matter of just societal cohesion and like a social compact, for a time, I accepted that there were some temporary measures that I would maybe reluctantly accept. But that's gone now. That was first eroded, I think, by the widespread endorsement of mass protest gatherings in June of 2020, even though for months before, the same public health officials who were suddenly chanting racism is the real pandemic, they were fervently denouncing anybody who would dare to gather in a group, even outside. So that already ruptured the social compact. And then, we have mass provision of vaccines thanks to the successful socialized medicine program instituted by none other than Donald J. Trump. So the whole frame of mind where one, I think, could at least be justified in making these sorts of allowances for intrusive policy measures, stay-at-home orders, lockdowns, shuttering of schools, whatever, that's gone. And now the officials who still cling to that mentality and still seek to micromanage the lives of adults and still seek to put on this moralizing performance where an asymptomatic case result is somehow the end of the world, those people, I think, just need to be outright opposed. And in some cases where they wield the most power, showered with contempt. I think I thought then and continue to think now that Connecticut College is actually a very important test case in what populations were willing to accept in the name of a permanent crisis. Because I had gotten messages from other administrators at other colleges saying that they were keenly keeping abreast of the situation at Connecticut College, and contemplating whether to impose similar measures at their own college should cases spike, which they are and will inevitably spike as we proceed into the colder time of year. And so if these officials don't recalibrate, if they give themselves over to this permanent crisis mentality, then they're just going to be lurching from crisis to crisis indefinitely. And it's not going to stop at colleges. And even if it did stop at colleges, guess what? The students who populate these colleges will soon be running the media, corporations, governmental entities, and so on and so forth. So it's important as a kind of breeding ground for the kind of tendencies and sensibilities which will soon become dominant throughout the rest of society. So, mission accomplished from my standpoint. Delivered on my pledges to the students who had asked me to come. Delivered on prompting a debate that had otherwise been suppressed at this particular college. Within hours, the lockdown is lifted, although they are subject to still some lesser restrictions, which could, who knows, become more intensified given the persistence of the surveillance testing regime. And so the surveillance testing regime is actually the fundamental fallacy here. So until administrators get rid of that, they're always going to be coming up with these positive test results that somehow justify intrusive actions into the lives of their subjects. So if people on social media want to have a laugh at my personal appearance, fine. I'm a pretty self-deprecating person. I sometimes ridicule my own personal appearance. Don't have a lot emotionally invested in that, and so that's a perfectly acceptable trade-off in my eyes to actually do something that was of use to a real-life population of people who otherwise would not have anybody speaking for them. And then, sure enough, shortly after this Connecticut College episode, I began getting more and more emails from college students and parents and administrators around the entire country informing me about inane, arbitrary measures that they were experiencing in their own campuses. So, for example, Brown University. On the very day that I went to Connecticut College, Brown University imposed its own new quasi-lockdown because of resurgence in cases, of course, where student activities like clubs and other meetings, they have now been barred and must be conducted virtually. Students are not permitted to meet outside like their pods of 5 people and socialize and, God forbid, make friends. They are prohibited from patronizing bars and restaurants. And, this cycle is just going to continue unless the underlying fallacy is revisited, which is the total lack of utility any longer of this perpetual surveillance testing regime. So I'm actually in Providence, Rhode Island right now. I'm going to go walk around Brown University and maybe meet some people who I've been in contact with and continue reporting on the story because I am insistent that it really has hugely significant wider societal implications. But I've gotten messages from, again, so many places around the country, every region. Georgetown University, I received this amazing, perversely amazing emails from a dean at the law school who was encouraging students to snitch on one another. for committing violations such as, and what are some of the violations currently at Georgetown that will get you in disciplinary trouble? Well, removing your mask even for a split second in class to take a sip of water, that's prohibited. Removing your mask to ask or answer a question in class, that's also prohibited. And so the good dean of the law school there wants students to rat each other out for committing that egregious violation. And there are just so many other examples. Even in Connecticut, I mean, people were saying, "Oh, this is just one." People were, trying to rebut me and saying, "Oh, Connecticut College is just this one isolated instance, and you're fixating on it excessively." Well, I got forwarded yet another email from another college in Connecticut, Sacred Heart, which used the model of Connecticut College lockdown as a threat to demand more compliance of the student population there with their restrictions. So they're essentially lording over their students with the threat of imposing a Connecticut College style lockdown in the near future if cases continue to rise, even though the utility of counting these cases at all among asymptomatic young adults who are almost universally vaccinated, there is no logic there anymore. And so if you're extra cynical, I can't really blame you for thinking that this is all an excuse for administrators to kind of marshal their power and cling to their power that they've been arrogated previously under emergency supposedly conditions, but now they want to keep that power forever. And even if they even if it means creepily snooping in the private lives of students who are adults, they will continue it, and maybe they get some kind of weird, semi-perverted satisfaction from micromanaging the lives of those adults. So that's what I've been up to. If you're out there listening or hearing this, and you have any other interesting information about what's happening at a college or a university that you attend or you are familiar with, or even other institutions that are not educational, I think if it's necessary and incumbent on everybody at this point who is a fan of civil liberties to more and more forcefully challenge the underlying logic of these surveillance testing regimes. Otherwise, they're going to become permanent fixtures of ordinary life, and the ramifications of that are not going to be pleasant. All right, everybody, I'm going to go scan through some comments, and let's see if anybody has something interesting to say. On YouTube, my friend Sparky is commenting, who I like, and thank you also for watching on Rockfin. All right, everybody, we will regroup again soon, and thanks for tuning in. Take care.